Good evening, I'm Larry Lorenz. The trial of Mayor Ray Nagin is scheduled to start later this month, though there are questions whether it will be held at all. Still, we'll be looking at preparations for the trial tonight. We'll also discuss the St. Tammany Parish coroner under federal investigation, new life for the Riverwalk, Avondale's future, and the upstate congressional race. Our Future Watch segment examines the city's pursuit of another Super Bowl. Pursuing those matters for us are tonight's Informed Sources. ERROL LABORDE, producer of Informed Sources. Richard Thompson, reporter for the New Orleans Advocate. Dawn Ostrom, our Future Watch reporter. And Stephanie Grace, columnist for the New Orleans Advocate. And Errol, the St. Tammany coroner Peter Galvin resigned today. He's under federal investigation.
Yeah, I think he's resigning next week. Okay, he's resigning next Friday. He's under federal investigation. But what the legal action is a bill of information that was issued. And Kenneth Polite, the new U.S. attorney, pointed out that a bill of information is not to be confused with an indictment, and still you have all the assumptions of innocent until proven guilty. But still, all things considered, you probably prefer not to have a bill of information being issued by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And as the Justice Department is summarizing it, it's conspiracy to steal funds from the coroner's office. Now that's broken down into different levels, and I know, Stephanie, that you've been looking at it.
Right. There are a number of charges. Again, a bill of information is it is a charge, but it's usually also an indication that somebody is going to plead guilty. So the expectation is that that's what's going to happen. And often what happens is you get charged with less than you might have otherwise if you had gone, fought the charges and been indicted. So it's conspiracy with several other employees. So that's interesting because they're not named and not charged. So that maybe is giving you an idea of where the case might go. It's a total of almost $200,000 in funds, in public funds. The biggest chunk of it, $111,000, is time. It's annual and sick leave that Peter Galvin took but was not entitled to, apparently. $111,000 worth over 5 years he's charged with basically improperly taking. There's another $50,000 that is, he personally had a contract with the Slidell City Jail. And what he did, apparently, is he had, or what he's accused of doing, is have an employee of the coroner's office basically do that work.
And the contract was with him privately, not as coroner,
not as the coroner, and not with the coroner's office. Right. And then there are some other personal expenses. There are always the credit cards and the meals. And
he liked to eat out at nice restaurants.
That's about $15,000 in personal items, credit cards, meals. There's a generator for a boat, a life raft, life jackets, a GPS, things like that.
Things a coroner really
exactly
wouldn't need.
Yes. Not on public time, anyway.
Right.
So, and again, if convicted, he could face up to 5 years in prison.
Throughout the course of this, media look into him, even though he's claimed no wrongdoing, hasn't he?
He has,
and stayed in office.
And he has fought very hard to stay in office against, efforts by the parish government, the legislature, to remove him. So usually what happens in cases like this where somebody pleads or is going to plead, part of the deal is that they have to resign. So remember Oliver Thomas, he resigned immediately when he pled. That's kind of a common
interesting
thing.
That he's not going to resign till next week, though.
It is. Maybe he has to clean out his desk.
And this was Kenneth Polite's first announcement. Of course, this would have been being conducted long before he got there,
Sure.
But it was his first chance to go out and make the announcement.
Which is interesting because, well, he actually didn't, or as of this afternoon, he hasn't had a press conference the way maybe Jim Letton often did. Not always, but one of the interesting things is when Polite has said things about possibly shifting the focus of the office from public corruption to violent crime. I think maybe people have read a lot into that, that maybe he wouldn't be focusing on public corruption. Obviously,
It hasn't gone away.
Hasn't gone away.
Well, now let's talk about another public official.
Speaking of, yes.
Ray Nagin is, he's tried to invoke what we've come to know as the Paracone defense, and he did that unsuccessfully.
Everyone's doing it, yes.
But what is the likelihood of a new delay?
This Judge Berrigan, seems like she really wants this to happen and happen soon. So he did try. Sal Paracone, of course, is the former U.S. attorney whose online commenting eventually led to Jim Letton's fall. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, Judge Kurt Engelhardt threw out the verdict in the Danziger Bridge case on the basis of these online comments from Sal Perricone and Jan Mann kind of poisoning the atmosphere. And so all these other people facing investigation in the office have said, hey, what about us? Because these officials did go online and anonymously comment about a lot of people. They certainly did about Nagin. But the other judges are kind of saying, it was juvenile, it was stupid, we're not happy with it, but this courtroom, we know how to have a trial that's fair, and we're going to go ahead and do it.
What about the likelihood that at the end, Mayor Ray Nagin will come to some sort of a plea agreement? That's been rumored for a long time.
It has, and again, a lot of people looking at this case are saying, he has, I've lost count of how many, 5, 6 people who are going to take the stand and say that I bribed that man. I mean, it's a tough case. It's going to be tough for him to beat. A lot of these, from Mark St. Pierre, who's already convicted, to a number of people who have pled guilty, Frank Fradella, Rodney Williams, some others who have not pled, who aren't charged, actually. And it's a tough case. So if you're looking at it objectively, you might say, he maybe should talk about pleading, but then of course he would have to admit he did something, and he apparently doesn't want to do that. And the other thing is, often if you plead, you can get a better deal if you give them somebody else. So who does Ray Nagin have to give them?
He's already been given by other people.
He has.
I don't know if Nagin in turn has anybody to give it.
He doesn't, and
at this point.
that's his bargaining power. So if he wants to cut a deal and get a very light sentence, it's tough. So I have to say, at this point, it kind of looks like it's full steam ahead. Anything could happen at the last minute. He could get cold feet, and he could, see what he's facing the night before and say, okay, I'm ready. But at this point, we're seeing this flurry of motions back and forth that are, the things that happen as a trial is coming. Motions to, invoke the Perricone defense, as you said, also to try to get the report that the Justice Department did on that, which has not been made public, which a lot of people want to see. He's tried to get that. He was rejected. There have been some motions on what evidence can be admitted. The U.S. Attorney's Office has basically asked the judge to say that Mayor Nagin cannot introduce evidence to show what a good mayor he was, basically, and all the good deeds he did. And he's fighting that, and the judge mostly sided with the prosecution, but is allowing them to make their case about, specific character traits they want to emphasize. The danger, this is what I wrote this morning, the danger of that is once Ray Nagin stands up there and starts talking about his character, that means the prosecution can talk about it too, and who knows where it goes from there.
Tell us about Judge Berrigan.
It's interesting. She was the target of some of these comments too. She's considered one of the more liberal members of this court. She's been pretty tough on them so far. One of the orders she wrote, she allowed Nagin's lawyers to she gave them permission to cross-examine people who are producing documents, basically. Bank records, things like that. There's actually one of the interesting documents that we may see is Stone Age, the granite company that Nagin and his family formed. They apparently applied for aid after the BP spill, even though they were out of business by then. That's come up. She basically has said, yes, the government, we can require the government to put the custodians of those documents on the stand, but if you do that, you have to cross-examine them, because the jury, we are not going to let you think that the prosecution is wasting the jury's time. If we're going to do something that's going to take a lot of time and the jury might think it's unnecessary, I'm going to make sure the jury understands whose initiative that is. So I think she's pretty tough. I think it's going to be interesting.
Stephanie, thinking about who he could deliver. Most mayors, by the time you become mayor, you at least have some kind of political structure behind you. Not necessarily a political machine, but at least political cronies, political organizations, political families. He was a maverick. He had none of that.
And he was isolated, and he's certainly isolated now. He's living in Dallas. I mean, we never see or hear from him.
Well, Richard Thompson, for a long time, it appeared that Avondale Shipyards was not going to have any future. But its owners are looking for a new future. Doing what?
Well, what they're looking to do, and they've been talking about since the end of last year, is to try to break into the commercial energy sector, to go from naval shipbuilding, which has been their bread and butter for a number of years, into this sector where, right along the hub of the oil and gas industry in the Gulf, a lot of people seem to think it makes sense.
And they have very skilled workers there.
They do.
And the machinery too, right?
Mm-hmm. And in the 3 years now since the defense giant Northrop Grumman really shocked the region by saying they were going to close Avondale, the numbers have still dwindled down. They've gone from about 5,000 workers at that point in 2010. There are about 1,500 at the yard now. And the key is that this month they're slated to deliver the last ship to the Navy that will be built at Avondale. And so once that is completed, the workers will probably go from about 1,500 down to maybe 4 or 5. And by the middle of next year, they're going to spend that time building components for ships as they've started to move the business to Pascagoula. And so they're really up against the clock.
And some people might be confused about, because it's changed so often, about who owns Avondale now. It's under Ingalls, which also operates the shipyard in Pascagoula.
That's right. It's been under Ingalls now since 2011. Originally, it was Northrop Grumman who had said they were going to close the yard, and they decided to get out of the shipbuilding business altogether. And so they spun it off into Huntington Ingalls, and now that's where we're at today.
What happens to the employees, Richard? Shipbuilding would seem to be a pretty specialized trade.
Well, according to the union officials, is that they've kept tabs on the workers, the skilled workers who have been laid off gradually. Some have been rehired. Some are kind of waiting to see what happens in the next few months if they're able to ink a deal. It's interesting to try to track where they've gone, though. Bollinger, which has 10 yards in the Gulf Coast, says they've only added maybe 50 Avondale employees at this point. They've got hundreds of openings at yards all along the Gulf Coast, including in Pascagoula, but they have a hard time trying to convince people to make the 120-mile drive down there.
You know, the last 2 ships that they've built are personnel carriers for the Marines, so they're like landing carriers. And the second to last one, which was dedicated last year, I think it was called the Anchorage. Mm-hmm. I happened to be there, and one of the admirals was talking, and he was talking about how long these ships last. And he said, whoever will be the last captain of this ship, her parents have not been born yet. Okay, but that shows that's part of the problem. Okay, how long these things last? I mean, they're building. I mean, they got bombers. you know, from the '60s, and so these things are really built for a long life and durability. And so it's a fine place to build a ship, but maybe I guess the demand's not there anymore.
The Navy work has really dried up as they've gone from talk of a 600 ship Navy during the '80s to now 300 or so. The orders just aren't there, and they know the writing's on the wall in that regard, and I think that's why they're starting to look toward the energy sector.
And the aircraft carriers is the big gun, and they're not building aircraft carriers there, so it's not an aircraft carrier base.
Right.
Well, Don Ostrom, let's look to the future. It looks like the New Orleans is in the red zone for Super Bowl 52.
We are in scoring position for a record 11th Super Bowl. This week, the NFL announced that New Orleans, Indianapolis, and Minneapolis are invited to present bids. What happens next is the Saints and the Greater New Orleans Sports Foundation, who will work together on this bid, are waiting to get bid specifics from the league. And those bid specifics come in what I'm told is about a 100-page document asking for everything from hotel rooms and hotel prices, venue availability, electricity availability, you name it. They will ask about it. Power requirements will be clearly outlined. I'm told we would, if the power situation glitch, whatever you want to call it, from this past Super Bowl actually was significant enough, we would not have been invited, or the city would not have been invited to actually make a bid. So it's not forgotten, but the slate is wiped clean on that front. But they will get that list of bid specifications sometime in November, and then by January or February, we'll have to turn around and answer every single thing in it and get commitments from hotels and commitments from venues and taxis and everything from plans on a building to schematic drawings to data sheets. It all goes in their bid that they return, or their package that they return to the NFL sometime in March to review that bid. They'll go back and forth with some questions and answers. You know, we can't provide this, but we can provide that. Not every city can provide everything, and the bid requirements change every single year. So even though New Orleans has hosted 10 Super Bowls already, it's not like they can go back to the document from last time and just change up a few things. It is a brand new, quick thing every time. And the New Orleans Sports Foundation isn't just working on the Super Bowl bid. They're also currently bidding on the men's Final Four, the women's Final Four. They have submitted a bid for the college football championship game because the BCS system is changing in the year 2016. And they're also looking for bid openings for the 2016 Olympic trials. So there's a lot of sports stuff that the city is watching.
And the fact is, New Orleans is the best city for a Super Bowl.
Well, and,
I mean, everybody will say, I mean, the facilities, the proximity of the stadium to downtown, that New Orleans is the best city.
Right, but at the end of the day, it's those 32 NFL owners. They're the only ones who make the decision. They'll get their final bid from the city and the Saints and the Sports Foundation in a nice, glossy, highlighted, less specific data package in April, and they'll have a month to review it. They will see all 3 proposals at the NFL owners meeting in May, and then they will send the cities out and immediately vote. So we'll know in May if the Super Bowl will coincide with the 300th anniversary of or birthday of the city, which, you know, it all should come together and gel well if we receive it. So there are reasons we talked on this show about the lavish party that was hosted by the Bensons for the NFL owners last year. Those kinds of things go a long way to getting those owners' votes. Apparently, there's been a concierge-type service for the NFL owners that's existed in New Orleans. If you come in for a game, we'll take care of you. Whatever you need, you call the Saints office or you call these offices, and we'll help you out. So we will know by May.
And the story about that big party, the Benson party, which you got to
Which
go
I
to,
got to
none of us.
attend. It was very lovely
But
in City
supposedly the
Park.
story is like New York is hosting the next Super Bowl, and the people from New York said, look, we can't compete with this. Okay,
Right.
so.
Well, yeah, they don't necessarily have the access to the venues or the proximity of venues. It's, you know, we can shine as a city in events like the
And
Super Bowl.
compared to New York, when, I mean, it's going to be in New Jersey, so of course things will not be close at all.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's going to be cold.
Yes.
You know,
And I know periodically they feel an obligation to have it in a cold weather city every so many years.
well, they may need
just
to
do the-
also. Indianapolis hosted a successful Super Bowl in 2012, so they might want to give that city credit. Minneapolis is building a new stadium, and the owners who go out and find a way to build new stadiums also get rewards from the other owners. But everybody across the board always says how much they like it here.
But Minneapolis is very cold.
Who wants to go there in February?
I always thought about
Maybe in
Indianapolis
August.
is a wonderful place to live, but I wouldn't want to visit there.
Right.
Well, what else? Anything else that is helpful on their bid?
Well, everything that's changing with this birthday of the city, the 300th anniversary of the city, the Riverwalk being reconfigured that we'll talk about in a little bit, the plans for the World Trade Center, even everything that's timing out for 2018.
The airport, possibly.
The airport expanding and changing, some changes to the Superdome also. Everything has that nice 2018 deadline, so there are new things that the Saints can show the NFL. Look what we'll have that we didn't have last time.
And people talk about when they go to the Super Bowl, like Saints fans who went to the Super Bowl when the Saints were there and outside of Miami, they talk about the long taxi rides. You got to go from point A to point B.
Right. And
New Orleans, you can walk.
The
I mean, you walk
natural
from the
parties and the natural
Yeah.
energy doesn't exist.
And we'll have a Riverwalk, Errol, that we didn't have before.
An unusual Riverwalk. You know, many years ago there was a company called the Rouse Company, not to be confused with the local supermarket operation. This is the company out of Columbia, Maryland. And this and the pioneer, the original Rouse, had this idea of going into towns that had a natural waterfront and developing a festive shopping area. And some of the early successes were Faneuil Hall in Boston, Harbor Place in Baltimore, South Street Seaport in New York, and then Riverwalk was an example of that. So they utilized harbors which were being turned more and more into commercial use as industry moved away from the waterfronts. They were fun places. They had lots of food and drink and those sort of things. The idea has run its course a little bit. I was at actually Harbor Place a few weeks ago in Baltimore, and that's still thriving, but South Street Seaport seems to be getting kind of worn out. I think the Riverwalk idea that kind of shopping was just kind of getting a little worn, and they felt like they needed to do something different. Now the facility has changed hands several times. It is now operated by a company called, actually, believe it or not, the Howard Hughes Corporation. And under Howard Hughes, they're doing something very dramatic because they realize they've got this great property. It's right next to the cruise ship terminals, and so you got these cruise passengers coming and going. But wouldn't it be nice if you could also lure locals here too? And so what they're developing is what they say is going to be the first urban outlet mall in the country. We have outlet malls 40 miles outside of cities around the country, but this is going to be an outlet mall. And they're hoping that that'll bring locals in, as well as this natural tourist base that you have. And it's a beautiful setting. I mean, it's a beautiful place just to go shop and see the view along the riverfront. They announced a few places. Something that's called Last Call, which is a Neiman Marcus store. And so technically this will be the first Neiman Marcus in Louisiana. Coach and various men's shops. The usual outlet shops are here. There's a place called Toby Keith's I Love This Bar, which is based on a song that he had, and I know that there's one of them in Las Vegas. So they're going to have the mix of entertainment and the shopping, but man, if it works, it's going to be just a huge success. And then you just put it in with all the other things going on in the riverfront right now. And so that area should really be powerful.
And downtown, too. I mean, so many people are moving back to that area to live, so it would kind of be the local mall, really.
Right.
I've understood from friends that when they've gone to the Riverwalk, there just haven't been very many shoppers there. It's almost empty.
Unless there's a cruise ship that's just come in, it is almost empty.
Well, that's what I say. I think the festive shopping center concept had just run its course. The kind of things where you go and you look for like glitzy souvenirs and little monogrammed hats and that sort of thing. That people aren't looking for that, and it certainly doesn't have a local base. And so by making an outlet mall, then you can really have something that would draw locals. But still, every Saturday and Sunday, you have a few thousand people who are either getting off of ships or waiting to get on. So that's an automatic base you have there on weekends. So you bring the locals, and you could have something.
Stephanie, the 5th congressional race almost has enough candidates in it almost to fill a cruise ship.
Exactly, or Congress, maybe.
Free for all.
There are 14 candidates running to replace former Representative now Rodney Alexander, who resigned over the summer to join the Jindal administration. He was a Democrat turned Republican who was kind of bemoaning the ugly state of things in Washington, and he actually got out just in time before things got really, really bad and the government shut down. So there's this. This is an election that was called very quickly. It's next Saturday, so it's on an off day. People are having real trouble getting their hands around it, I think, political people, because there are so many candidates, 14 people, as I said, 6 of them current elected officials, a mayor, the mayor of Monroe, a state senator, a bunch of public service commissioner, 4 members of the legislature, 1 former member of the legislature, so that's 7. And then there's the outsider rich guy who is saying, throw the bums out, and he is kind of getting some traction because he has an endorsement from one of the Duck Dynasty guys, which maybe in rural Louisiana that takes you somewhere, I don't know. But, I guess the kind of organizing principle, there are Democrats and Republicans in this race, so, 2 will rise to the top. We could end up with 2 Republicans. We could end up with a Republican or a Democrat. So that will, those obviously will be very different campaigns depending on how that shakes out. Probably not 2 Democrats given the district. The front runner, to the extent there is one, is a guy named Neil Reiser, who is a state senator, who was kind of the guy who was right there ready to move in and get all the endorsements, and he's an ally of Governor Jindal. He seemed to know this was happening before it happened, and he's raised a whole lot of money, over $500,000, much more than anybody else. But there's been a little bit of a backlash because, there's the idea that these things shouldn't be a fix, I think, and things kind of went so smoothly for him at the beginning that a lot of people said, wait a minute, the voters get to decide. So I think that's one of the reasons you had a lot of other candidates get in. You've had a number of journalists, bloggers, other even elected officials say, you know, wait a minute, we need to let the process run out. So it'll be interesting to see if this guy actually does make it to the top or not. I suspect he probably will. But with 14 candidates and a low turnout, and it's a big sprawling district.
Yeah,
it goes
it goes
from
from the north.
all the way down to the outskirts of this area, you know, because actually Neil Reiser in the legislature, when they did redistricting, he's one of the people who fought to make sure that North Louisiana would have 2 districts, not one. One containing Shreveport, one containing Monroe and Alexandria, and that's this current district. And again, if he had not done that, then there would have been an incumbent, you know, this district would have been open for somebody like, say, him.
And that's what happens with those primarily rural districts, because there are 6 congressional districts, so each district has to represent 1/6 of the state's population. And in the rural areas, that's just spread out all over. And usually there's some geographic sections kind of left out of it and all that. So
and here you have, you have somebody who represents this area, this area, this area. They all have their little community.
Well, we'll be looking for the outcome. Errol, what else do you see?
Well, speaking about the riverfront, this Sunday, a ship called the Norwegian Jewel comes into New Orleans, and this is part of Norwegian Cruise Lines, which will be sailing in and out of New Orleans through April, using the same Western Caribbean route. And so, with that and Carnival, which we have year-round, so the cruise ship activity is about to really pick up.
Okay. Would you like to give us your view, Richard?
Well, one race that I've been keeping a close eye on is the Red Sox playoff chances. And I got to tell you, I'm feeling good about them taking on the Tigers this weekend. I'm thinking Red Sox in 6.
Okay.
Ooh.
The Boston Red Sox.
That's right.
They've got more beards than those Duck Dynasty guys than the Red Sox.
Good thing they're not playing the Yankees, right?
I think we can stick with sports, and the Red Sox can win all they want. Go Red Sox, but the Patriots are going to fall, and the Saints are going to be 6-0 by Monday.
Saints going to be 6. You know, you ought to get those little dolls from Angela and bring those. You're talking.
I was right the last 2 times, so I'll stay right.
Well, a different kind of sports, I guess. This coming week, Mayor Landrieu is going to present his budget, so let the games begin.
What kind of a budget are we going to have in this city?
Tough budget. He has absolutely been laying the groundwork to say the city is facing, it's doing well, but it's facing so many big expenses, the firefighters' pension, the consent decrees. He's been preparing people for pain, and I think it's coming.
All right. Well, we're sorry that you gave us this painful news, but we have to go now. Thanks all for being with us. Thank you for being with us on Informed Sources. Be back again next week. Good night.